hi students in Mr. CPL's class. I'm so happy to meet another class from Las Vegas. I did remember that you were there. I just had to confirm because I know that Mr. Kraus works with students all over the world, which is actually how I met him. Um, I used to be a teacher until 2015. I had my own classroom, and we would do exactly what you're doing. We would be talking, my students would be talking to teachers and students from all over the world. I belong to an international teachers organization, and I would go to a conference every year that's called ISTE, and that's where I met Mr. Kraus. So when I finished teaching, I was young, I guess. I wasn't 65 yet. I wasn't even 55 yet. But what I decided to do was go and work for another organization who uses technology to connect kids from around the world. And they were just starting a program called Connected North. So right now I do exactly the same thing that Mr. Kraus does, is I connect students in the remote parts of Canada. And I'll show you in a little bit, in places that if you look on the map of Canada, they'll be all white. Those are the students I connect to. And I just talked to 2 classes this morning. So it was really cool. So that's my job now. I'm a mom and a grandma. So I have 3 kids and I have 2 grandchildren, and COVID has made it really, really hard for us to see one another. But I did all the things that I needed to do. So I quarantined and did tests. And then just last week, I was in Vegas. I love the shows. I love Vegas. I love going down there, not when it's 108 the way it was last week. So I was worried about Mr. Kraus because I know he runs every day. So I went to see, I'll show you. I'm going to share my screen and it'll show a little bit about me and a little bit about Canada. But what I really want to do in about 25 minutes or so is answer some questions, because there have been some things that have happened in Canada over the past 6 months or 8 months. And I'm sort of wondering if you know about it, and B, if you're interested in any, like what you're interested in about Canada, because you and the United States and Canada are probably the closest neighbors and relationships that we have. I have many friends from the United States, and I visit them as much as I possibly can. And we're probably the cultures that are most alike if you travel around the world. Like, I've been to places that are all over the world that are very different than we are, but I think Canadians and the Americans are most similar if we were to travel from one country to another for a lot of reasons. So I'm going to share my screen. So, as I said, I love Las Vegas, and it's not the best set up slide, but it's a place where my mom and my daughters and my best friend and I went to celebrate my mom's, my mom. She wanted to go to Vegas, so we took her. It was her life dream to go, so we took her to 5 shows and a lot of casinos. She loves the casinos. I think she liked the Luxor the best. So we hired a photographer to come and document that. So she's 91 now, and she was 90 or maybe 88 in that picture, still in great shape. And then here we are last week when I went to see the person that I've been following the most, Donny Osmond, but I've also seen Elton, and my favorite show there is Love. So we went to see that. Really cool. So I just wanted to say, yeah, I've been where you live. And I also actually went out to one of the Pinecrest schools a little while ago. So where do I work? I work in all of these blue dot locations. So anywhere in Canada where there's a blue dot, they're one of what we call my schools. I work really intensely with 10 of those schools. So I would do exactly the same thing as Mr. Kraus would for these schools. And if I don't have a mouse, so it's not letting me do that. But if you look up to the sort of the top right-hand corner, the schools that I connect to are mostly in Nunavut. And those are where you would find the Inuit people. So they're it's very cold. Like, I'll tell you how cold it is in a little while. And then I worked intensely with a lot of schools in Northern Ontario. So if you look in the Minnesota border, One of the schools that I have is about a 10-minute drive from the US border, but it's considered a northern community because they have many indigenous students living here. And then we have schools in the Yukon, which is close to Alaska. But basically we're around the 60th parallel. So things like internet and power and food, they have water insecurity, food insecurity. So we go into those classrooms to encourage the students to go to school. You guys are really lucky you're at a school where your teachers really care deeply about you and that you have access to school. This is my family. We are in Lake Louise, and we're missing one daughter. She was teaching in Korea, and that's the person in the yellow is Amanda. She is the mother of my two grandchildren, who are Riley and Maya, and her husband Scott, and then my son is on the other side of my husband. So we like to ski. This is another part of Canada that's really special, a place where people visit a lot. And this is an Inukshuk, and Inukshuks are often seen in the north because where I work, there are no trees. Like, can you imagine going outside and not seeing any trees? I know that you don't have a lot of big trees, but you do have bigger vegetation. You have the tall pine trees. Their vegetation, the highest, is about this high, because they're above it's called permafrost. They're above the tree line, so trees cannot grow. So they don't have any landmarks. So they build Inukshuk out of what they have, and they're landmarks that help them navigate through the north. So you'll see Inukshuk a lot in Canada. Another thing that Canadians are sort of famous for are the Northern Lights. You need to be above a certain parallel, and I'm not sure, maybe the 50th parallel. On a cold, clear night, you can look up and see the Northern Lights, the Aurora Borealis. And this is actually magnetism from the sun that causes this. And some nights are better than others, but I was up in Nunavut, and they had the Northern Lights were out dancing. You could see the big Orion's belt there. So it was a super clear night, but it was also 65 degrees below zero. So it was cold. So to get this picture, we pretty much froze. So that's one thing that you can see in Canada, but you have to be really far north. We have museums. We have a lot of museums. One of the museums that I'm not sure if Mr. Krause is connected to is the Royal Tyrrell Museum. We're famous for having the dinosaurs. So if you look go up on your map, right above you in your map is Alberta. Those are called the Badlands. That would be sort of in the middle of our prairies. And if you went directly north, that's where they find a lot of dinosaurs. And they found T-Rex there. They have another one bigger than T-Rex called Albertosaurus Rex, and he's vegetarian. They had Tyrannosaurus Rex and well, if you like dinosaurs, this would be a great museum for you to go and see. But that's directly north of you. It'd be a great place once the border opens and is easy. Wonderful place to visit. Again, Canada is very diverse and beautiful. This is closer to you now. This is going south towards the Montana border in a place called... I will have to remember it. It's called the Road to the Sun. And so there are lots of lakes and trees, and it's just stunningly beautiful. It's just another beautiful scene. So government. So how is Canada different from the United States? Well, we are still considered what's called a Commonwealth country. So countries like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, some countries in Africa are still considered under the role of, I guess, Kenya, Zimbabwe, Malawi. They're under the role of the Queen. But the Queen doesn't have anything to do with our government. She's just the figurehead. She's the person who's on our money. She doesn't have any say in what happens. So she gives her power. There was an act that was brought into into power when Justin Trudeau's father, his name was Pierre Elliott Trudeau, he did what's called repatriating the Constitution. So he brought the Constitution of Canada over from England, and he created separated from the Queen. But still, the Queen we still have to ask her permission to do a couple of things. So she has a representative, the lady in the bottom portion of the screen with Justin Trudeau. Her name is Mary Simon, and she is the representative of the Queen in Canada, and she is the Governor General. And if you look right above her head, it says ER, which means Elizabeth Regent. So she is representing Queen Elizabeth in Canada. She has no power. She is just the person who says to Justin Trudeau two things. She's only allowed to make decisions or say yes to two things. One of them is Justin will go to her and say, may I hold an election? And she says yes or no. And the other thing she says is, may I open Parliament, which is like opening your Congress. So our Parliament takes a summer holiday. So she'll open the Parliament. So that's her job. And the cool thing about Mary Simon right now is she is an Inuit leader. Do you want to know a story? Raise your hand if you want to know the story about what happened to the former. Yeah, so we had a former Governor General not too long ago, and her name was Julie Payette. And she was taken out of her role for bullying. Can you imagine? She was not treating her staff well. Yeah, so she was the representative of the Queen, and she didn't treat her people well. And there were complaints about bullying, bottom line harassment at her in the workplace. And so Justin Trudeau had to make the very difficult decision, and the Queen together, to take her out of her role as representative of the Queen, because we can't have somebody who was helping the government put up, have integrity and show compassion for their people if we have one of the leaders being a bully. So she was taken out for being a bully and replaced with Mary Simon, who is Inuit. So really is going to be good for the Indigenous people and Inuit and Métis people in Canada. So this is how our government works. We have two branches. We have the federal government, and we have the provincial and territorial governments. They left out territorial, and they are all looked over by the Queen. So the federal government will have the Governor General, and the provincial government, so that would be like the government of Ontario, the government of Quebec, will have lieutenant governors. So on the federal side, we have a Senate, which is just like your Senate. Those people have their seats forever and ever. And then we have the House of Commons, and those people get voted in. They're run by the Prime Minister and the cabinets and the ministries. And so there's a Minister of Education. Oh, sorry, no, that's on the provincial side. There's a Minister of Transportation, the Finance Minister, several positions of power that are similar to yours, but a little bit different. And on the provincial side, so the provinces in Canada look after their education. They look after their own healthcare. They look after their own roads and cities. So it's a little bit different in Canada, but just think we have a federal government, which looks after all of Canada, and we have provincial government, which looks after what would be like your states. But education is run by the provincial government, which is a little bit different here. So how many of you knew that we are having an election in 1 week? One person, two people. That's okay, because when I was with my friends last week in Las Vegas, I said, do you realize when I go home, I need to help make a decision about who will be running Canada? So right now, our Prime Minister is Justin Trudeau. He is a second generation Prime Minister. His father ran the country for many years, and many think was one of our best prime ministers. But he called an election during a pandemic. So we're not sure if he's going to remain in power. We have his opposition. We have two parties. We actually have more than two parties, but two parties that really will decide. We have a conservative person. His name is Aaron O'Toole, and there should be an E at the end. I forgot that. And we have what's called the New Democratic Party, which is run by Jagmeet Singh. Now, it's a pretty close race between the Conservatives and the Liberals. Justin Trudeau is Liberal, and we're not really sure. It's almost like your past election. We're not sure who's going to win. But the people who really have all the power are not those two, Justin and Aaron. The people who are voting for Jagmeet Singh can cause what's called a minority government, which gets really complicated. It's not a win or a lose. You win if you have the majority of the votes, but you also you have to have a majority government. You have to have many more seats in the House of Commons. If you win with not enough seats in the House of Commons, it's called a minority government. So we're having that election next week. And I've already voted because I know the lineups are going to be really, really long. So other things about Canada. We love our hockey. There's no two words about it. We love our hockey. And if you live where I live, you are a fan of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And one of our most famous Toronto Maple Leafs started a coffee company called Tim Hortons. So I didn't see Tim Hortons. I wish it were down in the United States because it really is great coffee. It's like Dunkin' Donuts, but it is a tradition to come over the border. And one of the first things that you do is go to Tim Hortons and have a double and a cinnamon bun. And a double is 2 cream, 2 sugar, and in a cup of large cup of coffee. So it was started on May 17th, 1964 with one store in Ontario, and now there are thousands. So this is what a typical Tim Hortons breakfast would look like. Timbits, which are little donut holes. And I think I don't know what they're called in Dunkin' Donuts, but they're really fun to have. We don't have Tim Hortons all over the world, but we do have them on the Canadian base in Afghanistan, which I think is really cool because our soldiers over there miss Tim Hortons. They missed 2 things. They missed Tim Hortons and they missed hockey. So I think, there's another slide. But over the last 50 years, we have Tim Hortons in 4,000 restaurants, 4,350 worldwide. There aren't too many outside of Canada. I can maybe count on one hand how many I've seen outside of Canada. But it's great coffee. It's just like Dunkin' Donuts, but this is a real Canadian thing. Hockey is really Canadian. As I said, every Canadian child that I know is raised to be a hockey fan. I'm not sure what sport you guys are raised to be part of. And the biggest prize in hockey is the Stanley Cup. And I think 2-3 years ago, the Las Vegas Knights were really close. They didn't win, but they came second. Is that true, Mr. Krause? Yeah. They had the Cinderella story of all the NHL ever happened. And that was the year, actually, that this was taken. I'm very fortunate, just like Mr. Krause, to meet some pretty incredible people. So my family and I and granddaughter got to go to the Hockey Hall of Fame archives where they were just polishing up the Stanley Cup. And if you've ever watched a Stanley Cup final, you will see this gentleman here. His name is Phil Pritchett. He is known as the keeper of the cup. And to men in Canada, he is the most important person in the world because he looks after the Stanley Cup and make sure that nothing happens to it. And this year, actually, it got dropped when it was in Florida, when the Tampa Bay Lightning won it. One of the people dropped it off the parade, dropped it off the truck. So that was a little hard, stopped their hearts a little bit. But anyway, another typical Canadian thing is loving the Stanley Cup. So about the North, the apex predator in all of Canada and probably all of the world is the polar bear. And 2 years ago, just before COVID happened, I was really lucky. And Ralph knew that I did this because I was so excited. I saw him about 2 weeks before I went, right? I went to the Arctic. I went up to visit some of my schools on a cruise. And it was a cruise to learn about the wildlife and also the art in Canada, created by Indigenous and Inuit artists. And so one day we were on a Zodiac. So a Zodiac is a small boat that dropped off the side of the cruise ship. It wasn't even a cruise ship. It was an explorer ship. It was an icebreaker. And so there were 6 people in this, in the Zodiac. So really small Zodiac, along with our guide who had a gun. And he said, we're going to look for polar bears today. And he says, I have this gun and I do not want to use it. When you see this polar bear, any polar bears, do not scream, because they will think that there's action going on, and they're fast swimmers and they'll be in this boat faster than anything. So we cruised around a little while and we found a polar bear, and we sat about 50 feet away from him. And you can see that he's looking at us and we're looking at him, and we were so excited. But he is the apex predator in all of Canada. He basically controls what's happening in the north. So if the polar bears have a lot of food and are able to find food, the ecosystem stays where it is. If the polar bears do not have enough food and can't find their food, the ecosystem starts to get a little bit shaky. And then the effects of global warming start working down the coasts of Canada, and it's not good. So we're getting there. This bear is in good shape. But we do have protocols if you are living in an area where polar bears live. This is another polar bear we saw. Look at this polar bear. She's a female, and it's the summer, so she's probably pregnant. And then you look at this male. He's a male, but he's in better shape. This one did not have enough food. And this is a picture one of the people on the cruise ship took as well. She's not in great shape. A little bit about polar bears. They have black skin. Maybe somebody in the class can tell me, why do you think they have black skin?
Kyler says they have black skin to hold in heat. Molly, is that true?
That's absolutely true. Yeah.
All right.
They live in an environment where it's really cold normally during the winter. So any sunlight, any heat needs to be absorbed. And their skin is translucent, so if you took a piece of polar bear skin, it's white because it looks white because it's reflecting the snow or the environment. But if you looked at it like a piece of fiber, it almost looks like fiber because it's translucent. It is hollow in the middle to keep the heat in, and also clear. So that's a really cool fact about polar bears. Another cool fact about polar bears, if you live in the polar bear capital in the world, in Churchill, Manitoba. So if you look at the map of Canada, you'll see Hudson Bay, and it'll come around Ontario, and about the top of Hudson Bay is Churchill, Manitoba. And that's where the polar bears migrate to just before they go onto the sea ice. So in Churchill, Manitoba, you have to leave your parked car door open in case you're being chased by a polar bear, so that you can just hop into somebody's car if you're being chased by a polar bear. That's an actual law. That's kind of weird. Another weird fact, another thing that's happening because of climate change is that it's getting warmer in the north. So the grizzly bears can get farther north. And the polar bears are staying where they are, but they're mating, so it's a combination of a polar bear and a grizzly bear, and they're called growler bears. And those growler bears are not fertile. So it means they can't breed, which isn't really helping the populations of the grizzlies or the polar bears, because we know that they have to breed and have a certain number of babies to maintain the ecosystem. So that's another cool fact. So we're starting to get a species called growler bears. Famous Canadians. Well, we have lots of famous Canadians who perform in Vegas. I saw signs for Bryan Adams. I saw to go to his concert in Vegas would be great. I saw signs for David Foster, who would be a fabulous show to see. I think he's at the Wynn. But when we think about famous Canadians, many of us will say they've been influenced by this gentleman named Terry Fox. And maybe raise your hand if you know the story of Terry Fox. No? Okay. And Mr. CPL does as well. So Terry Fox actually was my age. Right now, if he were alive, he would be 63 years old. And he was just a regular kid. He was a regular kid who loved to play basketball, and he got cancer in his leg. And he was, they had to amputate his leg in 1980, 1970, 79 or 80. And he didn't want to loll about feeling sorry for himself. So he thought, I want to raise money to help the Cancer Society by raising $1 for every Canadian who is in Canada. And at that time, there were 20,000 people, or 20 million. So he wanted to raise $20 million for the Cancer Society by running across Canada. So he started his journey in Newfoundland, which is at the very east coast of Canada. Newfoundland is also famous for another thing, and if we get to that, we might not have time for that, but it has to do with 9/11. So he ran all across Newfoundland on one leg, and he had an artificial leg and one real leg, and he ran a marathon every day. So he ran, is it 26 miles, Mr. Kraus, a full marathon?
Yeah, full marathon is 26 miles. Yeah.
26. Because my daughter's done full marathons. So 26 miles every day for months. He started on April the 15th, 1980. I can't see the year. Oh, no, it doesn't say, but I think it was 1980, and then ran all the way till September 1st. Every single day he ran a marathon. And at first he wasn't too famous. People didn't know about what was happening, so he wasn't getting a lot of donations. But by the time, there's Terry, and I just think of him, of what we were, the whole country just fell in love with him and got behind him. And as he got closer and closer to Quebec and Ontario, he became a little bit more well-known and was interviewed and just talking about why it was so important that he do this run to bring awareness to cancer. You need to think that was almost 40 years. I think it was 40 years ago. Cancer was still a disease that killed most people that had it. We hadn't made the strides in medicine that we had now. So this young boy, he was only 22, 23 years old at the most, just ran for awareness. And he was one of the first people to do something like this, to run across the country. However, he got to a place called Thunder Bay, and he realized they had to take him off the run because his cancer came back. It was it was now found in his liver and in his lungs. So in September 1981, September 1980, they took him back home so that he could get treatment. And he passed away on June 28th, 1981. And the reason, 1981. And the reason I know that is because I signed my teaching contract, my very first teaching contract that day, shortly after hearing that Terry Fox had passed away. But he left a legacy that first he showed that people need to care for one another. He showed that we could work through such adversity, and he did that run every single day for 9 months. And he showed the country that we could all come together for a cause. And since 1981, and this is last year's number, they've raised over $750 million for cancer research. And this weekend is what's called the Terry Fox Run. So kids get with their families and they run 5K and they raise money for the Terry Fox Foundation, which does incredible work across Canada. I would say he is my hero. I think about him a lot because I think he's my age and he made such a difference in the world. This is his near his hometown in Vancouver. They have a whole display dedicated to Terry. And, he said things like, it's the thing about cancer. It happens all the time to people and he's not special. And he kept telling the world he was not special, but he really, really, truly was a special person. And I wonder what the world would be like and what cancer awareness would be like if he had survived.
Molly, well, first off, I just want to thank you so much for coming back to my class.
Always. I asked for this.
It's always great to see you. All right. So my class, we've been talking about Canada, and our kind of essential question is like, how does where you live influence how you live, right? So we've been talking about the 5 regions of Canada, the North, the Atlantic, Prairie, Core, and Pacific regions. And my kids have several questions for you because you are a primary source.
Okay.
So we're going to go one at a time. They're going to start throwing some questions at you, and then just do what you do. All right.
Okay.
All right, Molly. So I have JJ here, an 8th grader here from Las Vegas. He's about to go to high school. He has a few questions for you. Go ahead, bud.
So my first question is, how many languages do you speak?
How many languages do I speak?
Yes, that's what he asked.
Unfortunately, I speak only one language. I did take French in school. We have 2 official languages in Canada. I just didn't pick it up very well. I can get along in Quebec, but they don't really like it that I don't speak French when I'm in Quebec. It's not the popular thing to be. So unfortunately, I only speak one language. I would say most English-speaking Canadians do not speak both languages, but many people in Quebec do speak both languages.
My second question is, like, what are the most common foods?
The most common foods? I would say our menu is really similar to yours. People like hot dogs and hamburgers. Canada is a very diverse cultural country. So we have, in pockets, we have areas where the immigrants came. In Alberta, there are a lot of Ukrainians, so you'll find a lot of Ukrainian food. In Toronto, we have a lot of Italians and Greeks. So we have Italian and Greek food, and that results because of immigration and multiculturalism. But I think you're wanting me to talk about poutine, which comes from Quebec. In Quebec, they have French fries and gravy, beef gravy, and it has to be a certain kind of beef gravy, and also cheese curds on top, and it's about a bazillion calories. So I don't eat it very often, but it does taste really good. And we have a thing called a beaver tail, which is like a cinnamon bun, just put into the shape of a beaver tail.
And then my third and final question is, do Canadians actually say sorry, or is that just like an American myth?
No, it's all the time. Yeah. And I'm almost about to say sorry, but yes, we do say sorry all the time. That's how you can tell a Canadian in a crowd. It's not the A, it's that they apologize for everything. Like I would if somebody hit my car, and this has happened to me, I get out of the car and say, "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry you hit me." Like, it's true.
Oh, it's like that movie Canadian Bacon.
It's true. We do say sorry all the time, and it's just I don't know. It's just different.
All right, Molly, we have Brent coming up right now. Brent has a few questions for you. Another 8th grader here from Las Vegas. And again, thank you so much for your time.
No worries.
All right, go ahead, Brent.
As for my first question, how did fishing affect Europeans when they settled in Canada?
Can you put your mask down and ask that? Are you allowed to? Okay, go ahead and ask.
How did fishing affect Europeans when they settled in Canada?
Good question. So how did fishing affect the Canadians when they settled in Canada? So we had 2 main points where people settled. One of them was in our area, and we're on the Great Lakes. So there's fishing there. And the other is around the St. Lawrence area, which is just north of would be northeast of Boston. So your ancestor or your settlers came from Europe and were taught by the indigenous people how to fish. So they would come and settle and learn from the indigenous people how to fish the specific species of fish that were in the area. So for example, in the Great Lakes, we have salmon and bass fishing and pike, and there are specific lures, and I'm not a fisherman at all. I'm a vegetarian, so I don't even know how to put a worm on a hook. But I do know that they were taught by the indigenous people who were in their area, whether they would be using lures, nets, or spikes to catch the fish. So things like salmon need to have a great big lure that has lots of tails and usually a fly on the end. Other fish are caught in nets. That would be the fishing that would be on the East Coast. So for looking for things like cod, they would be caught in nets. So it was the indigenous people that taught us how to survive in our own, with a country that has become our own. It isn't, well, there's a whole thing going on here now that we need to reconcile the land that we've taken. So we learned all of that from the indigenous people. On the West Coast, they have a lot of net fishing as well, and they would have learned that from the indigenous people on the West Coast. And there aren't many settlers who go up to the Arctic with the Inuit, but the Inuit have specific harpoon fishing, and they ice fish. So they cut a big hole in the ice and will fish for seals and char. It's absolutely integral to our survival here.
Hi, my name is Kylie. Thank you again for your time this morning. And so one of my first questions is, I believe that one of the greatest things about Canada is that they teach to embrace everyone's culture and just let them have their identity. So one of my first question is, how is living in a plural society, like Mr. Sepio brought up, affect you growing up?
Oh, wow. Well, I'm old, right? So, okay, that's a really good question, because when I was young, now I have to be quite transparent. I wasn't born here. I was born in England, but my mom and dad were living there on a secondment. My dad was living there on a secondment from his insurance company. So it's just, I was born in England, but raised Canadian. I came here when I was very young. But I was young just after World War II. So in the 50s. So in the 50s, there were lots of people coming from Italy, Ireland, England, Germany, Ukraine. They were getting out of post-war Europe. So, and they would settle in different areas in Canada, as I said. So in Toronto, there was a big Italian, a big German, a big Greek communities. And because my parents lived downtown, we were really blessed to have influences of all of those cultures around us, really, really close to us. But if you go out to Alberta, where the settlers didn't quite make it there, the immigrants didn't quite go there yet because there weren't restrictions on where the immigrants could go, it was still very homogeneous. It wasn't a plural society out in British Columbia and Alberta and Saskatchewan. The immigrants hadn't quite got there. But growing up, my nanny was Italian. I didn't learn to speak Italian, but I learned to love her food. So it was wonderful having the influence of Maria to, for the food. What I love about Toronto especially is you have all of those little communities who really add to what Canada is all about. So you can go and visit each of these little communities and really get a sense of the Italian Canadian lifestyle, because they do identify as Italian Canadian or French Canadian or Greek Canadian first. And even second and third generation children will identify themselves as Greek before they will identify themselves as Canadian. So having all of those cultures celebrated and being able to thrive was really good as a child. And I think it taught me to be accepting, because we had all of those cultures around us all the time. And my parents would really make sure that, like, we went to the community church. So I didn't go to the Catholic church where a lot of them went, but there were many we call it the United Church. You don't have the United Church of Canada in the United States because we're the United Church of Canada, but it was like the melting pot of the churches, so that all of the communities, if they weren't Catholic, they would come to our church. So it was really a beautiful experience. I know it's a little bit different now because I can't say there's more racism. I know that there was a lot of racism going on at the time. We still celebrate our communities, but I don't think they've been here for so long. They've been here for 60 years. So they still are very important communities, but they're becoming more, it's a little bit more diluted than it was just after the war. Now, my children would have a completely different answer for you because they grew up in a very different community. I happened to grow up in downtown Toronto where it was very different.
Okay, thank you for that great
You
answer.
can put your mess
Oh,
on. Go
Does
ahead.
that make sense?
It did, thank you. It was really.
He has one more question for you.
And then, sorry, so my last question, thank you for your time again today.
Mark, your next.
So my last question is, if you had to choose one of the 5 regions to live in, which would you go to live in and why?
Well, right now it's not hard. I would go to the Pacific region because that's where my grandchildren are, if I had a choice. I've been toying with moving to the East Coast. If I could choose, it would either be the East Coast or the West Coast for 2 different reasons. Living in Ontario is very intense. We have all the businesses, the banks, the insurance companies, the tech. Amazon is coming in, like Apple's here. So it's very intense. Everybody works 60 hours a week. And even retired, I work 60 hours a week. I was just saying to Mr. Krause, if I ever need to talk to somebody during that 60 hours, I can text him at any time. No, he's up to. So that's it's intense here. But if you move to the coasts, it's way more relaxed. It's a slower pace. Houses are a lot cheaper. I don't know if you're interested in the houses, a normal house, 3-4 bedroom house in where I live is $1.5 million. But if I went to the East Coast, my same house would cost about $200,000. If I went to the West Coast, my same house, if I weren't to live in Vancouver, would be about $500,000. So housing is expensive. The coasts are very relaxed. It's relaxed. The people are really friendly. But if I had to pick, if you said to me, Mally, where are you going to live tomorrow? I would say I would live beside my grandchildren, which is they're on the West Coast, and it's beautiful. It looks like right behind me. They have lakes and mountains and trees, and that's all you really need, and your family.
So just introduce yourself.
It's really intense in Ontario. Very intense.
Thank you again for answering my questions, and thank you again for your time.
Oh, thank you guys. I love this. No one ever asks about Canada.
Hey, Molly, I have 3 more students. I appreciate your time. I know
I have lots of time.
The kids are really engaged with this conversation, and I have 3 more kids that have questions. So,
Yeah.
Is it okay they can
Yeah,
ask?
yeah. I don't have anything to do till 4.
Oh, perfect. Pacific Coast time? No.
My time.
She has a few hours.
All right.
But no, I have.
We don't
work
want to
do too.
take a few hours because again, people in Canada are extra polite. Let's not take advantage
Oh,
of
that's
this.
true.
No,
Okay.
I'll say
As a-
whatever you
That's all I
guys
was
want to know, but I
asking.
do want to
Yeah.
show you the cold parts of Canada too, because that's important.
Okay, so we got 3 more questions, and then you do your thing. Here's
Then
Mark.
we'll see the coldest, most beautiful part.
Hi.
Hi.
Mark.
My question is, I know that Canada is the second biggest country in the world. Why does it have so low population?
Because it's too cold to live here.
Good question, Mark.
That's a really good question. And the bottom line is it is really cold anywhere above the 40 or the 50th parallel. It's really hard to live in the north, and resources are hard to get. And it's just really cold. So most people live close to the 49th parallel, which is 80% of our population lives within a couple hundred miles of the US border. And bottom line is it's just too cold to live anywhere else. There aren't the resources.
Okay, thank you.
Good job, Mark.
Good question. Hi.
Hi, I'm Jordan.
Hi, Jordan.
Pull your mask down.
Yeah, you can pull it down a bit.
Other than the polar bear, what animals live in Canada?
Oh, other than the polar bear. Oh, we have, let me go by regions. So I'll just go from north. So we have in the north, there's caribou, beluga whale, narwhal. I've never seen a narwhal, but I've always wanted to. Arctic char, Arctic hare. We have moose, beaver. I'm just sort of going down. Moose and beaver, squirrels. We don't have a lot of big insects the way that, like, we wouldn't have a lot of reptiles, again, because it's just way too cold, but we do have a lot of turtles. Our snapping turtles might get to be about this big. They don't get to be really huge because they just, it's cold. Like, the cold makes things not survive. There are lots of fish. We have bobcats, cougars out west, grizzly bears, black bears, brown bears, small mammals, skunks. I'm thinking about what we would have that you don't, aside from polar bears and bears. Moose, deer. Deer are quite rampant in our area. And many people have dogs and cats. Like, you're either in my neighborhood, you're either a dog person or a cat person. And there's no like in the middle. You're a dog person or a cat person in our neighborhood. And the thing that's happening though is because there's so much growth north of Toronto. I'll tell you what happened as a result of COVID. People in Toronto who lived in high-rise apartment buildings, like 50, 60 floors, and were quarantined for almost a year, they left their condos and they moved to the suburbs. I live in the suburbs. And so as more homes get built in the suburbs, it's pushing the animals farther and farther away from their habitats. So we've got what's called invasive species. So for example, an invasive species that is a real kind of a pain in the neck are the little red squirrels. We haven't had red squirrels in our area. We have black squirrels, and red squirrels are the nasty ones. They're the ones that dogs really hate. And they're causing damage. Another invasive species that came in was a caterpillar, it's a tent caterpillar, gypsy moth caterpillar, and it ate all our maple trees in our whole community. And part of that is because somebody brought that species in because of the urban growth. And it completely decimated all the maple trees on our street, who are just finally coming back now. They were bare out there in the spring. So we have lots of animals, lots of species, but nothing, like no big scorpions or big spiders the way that you do. I'm always worried when I go out to, is it Red Rock Canyon that I go to? And Red Rock Canyon.
Red Rock. Yep.
Yeah, that I'm going to run into a spider or a scorpion. Don't do that here. Oh, and Canada geese and lots of ducks.
Your animals sound friendly. A lot of those animals. They're probably not, but I don't know. I could go walking to get my mail and we see a tarantula, and you're like, ugh.
Oh, see, I would freak.
Yeah.
A Canada goose will attack you if you get in their space, but they are nasty and they hurt when they peck at you, but
That
nobody
sounds
goes
terrible.
near them because we know that they're nasty.
Ugh.
But they're all over. A set landed in our pool a couple of years ago and we just had to let them do their nest, and yeah. And then they let us use our pool for the rest of the summer. It was crazy. Hi.
Hi, my name is Ashmeet, and my question is, why do people move mostly to Toronto, Calgary, Ottawa, and what purpose or main job do they move for?
Good question. Okay, so you said Calgary, Toronto, and Ottawa. Okay, so three different career job markets there. So in Toronto, there are a lot of tech companies here now. We have all the big tech companies. We have Apple, Adobe, IBM. So there are a lot of jobs that are available. And to immigrate to Canada now, you have to have a job on the other side, unless you have to have a job here. So we have a lot of people applying for tech jobs. Also in Toronto, we have all the banking, all the insurance companies, and tourism is big. In Ottawa, people move to Ottawa if they want to have a government job. So even if you're moving from a different country, you could have a job in one of their embassies because that's our capital. And Calgary, actually people don't want to move to Calgary now because they're in quite a depression. Their economy is pretty much based on the oil industry, so things are not going well. So people are moving out of Calgary and moving to different parts. They're moving to Vancouver and back. A lot of people in Calgary came from Toronto or Southern Ontario and then went back. So yeah, that's a really good question. And why do you think they don't move to Nunavut or to one of the territories? I'm going to put that back on you. Why do you think they don't want to move there? Yeah. Yeah, that was a good question. Do you have another question?
No.
Okay.
We got one more. We have Natalia here. She has,
Okay, and I'm going to show you how cold it gets up there.
I do have to tell you, you did spoil me. I can't have any maple syrup anymore because what you sent me a couple years ago ruined me. All right, so thank you for that.
Well, I'm not going to talk about the maple syrup heist because that's going to take too long, but I'll show them how cold it is.
Yeah, I told the kids about
Yeah.
that. Here's Natalia, all right?
Hi.
Hi, my question is, what are some noticeable differences between Canada and the US?
Do you mean culturally or physically?
Physically.
Physically. Well, first, there are many similarities, but as you go further and further north and south, it gets warmer in the United States, so your climate and your landscape change. As you go further north in Canada, there are more trees and more lakes. But then you get to Nunavut and Northwest Territories and you'll reach the tree line where there are no trees and lots of ice. I have been really lucky to have the opportunity to travel. I meant to count up how many states I've visited. It has to be over 30. So I noticed that as you go further south, it gets more tropical. So you'll find more palm trees and more grasses and lower plants that smell great. We were outside one of the hotels the other day and I said, oh, it just smells so tropical here. It was just so nice. The coasts are very similar. It just gets hotter as you go down the coast. So as you go down the east coast of Canada, because it's the same mountain range that goes into West Virginia. So we have a mountain range called the Appalachians. So that crosses both borders. So that starts in Quebec and goes down to West Virginia, and then you go through a tunnel into Virginia, and there's no mountains. It's kind of strange. And on the West Coast, we have the same coastal mountains that go down as far to, I think they go all the way down, the coastal mountains go all the way down to Mexico.
Mhm.
Because I know in there's a place in California you can ski and swim on the same day. Tahoe.
Tahoe, Big Bear, all that area.
Yeah. So in the Yukon, which is just actually above you, it was 63 degrees below 0 Celsius. And in Fahrenheit, it's about the same. So it gets really cold. So you basically can't dress yourself. So the Inuit people and Inuit and Dene people use seal skin, because if it keeps a seal warm, it's going to keep you warm. So I'm going to teach you an Inuit word, which is a kamik. And the kamiks are snow boots. And believe me, these are so warm. They're made of seal skin, and they're waterproof, and they're amazing. The Inuit women wear these outfits called amautis, where they're made of seal skin or caribou skin. And what they do is they have a pouch in the back where they keep their babies really close to them. So the babies just get plunked in the back, and then they're kept warm. So it gets really, really cold. And now there's a designer who is in Paris, a Paris designer. She's an Inuit person working in Paris and designing these gorgeous coats. And that's basically how you keep warm. Yeah, so that's Canada in a nutshell. We would welcome, once those borders open up, man, we'd love to have you guys visit us.